Hi, everyone. Welcome to Project Herpetoculture podcast. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, and I'm joined as always by my intrepid co-host, Philip Leitz of Arids Only. We have an excellent show for you today, but before diving in, we'd have some brief housekeeping. So first, I'd like to thank Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting our show. It continues to be a pleasure to be part of this platform. We'd also like to extend special gratitude to Charlie, who generously edits our audio and has done a lot to improve the quality of our show over time. And we'd also like to take a moment to tell you about our sponsors. So first, we have Custom Reptile Habitats, who have been with us since day one. They produce top-of-the-line PVC reptile enclosures, and I use them for a lot of the large format vivaria here. They're also carrying universal rocks, misking products, and a bunch of other useful stuff. So if you're in the market for any of that and you're planning to make a purchase, consider doing so through the link in our bio or description. We'll receive a small commission at no additional cost to you, and that really helps us keep the lights on over here.
Up next, we have Fairy Tale Dragons. That's the joint venture between Heather Moy and Ron St. Pierre, both of whom have achieved legendary status in herpetoculture. They've accomplished quite a lot and produced some of the finest bearded dragons and taliqua in the country, alongside a whole host of other species such as emerald tree boas and green tree pythons. Check them out if you're in the market for any of that, and be sure to follow along with them on social media. They're always up to something interesting over there.
Next, we have Cold-Blooded Caffeine, roasters of delicious coffees from all over the globe. We have a private label with them, the PH Blend, which is a light roast coffee from Rwanda. It's a great choice for those who prefer a more floral coffee with notes of berry, but they have a wide variety of options for a broad array of preferences. So check them out. And if you place an order, don't forget to use the code PROJECTHERP for 10% off.
We're also very pleased to have the support of Exoterra, a brand that needs no introduction. It's safe to say that herpetoculture wouldn't be where it is today without the influence of Exoterra. For decades, they've been industry leaders in innovation, offering just about everything needed for reptile care, from diets and supplements to enclosures, substrates, and lighting. We're both big fans of their naturalistic terraria and substrates in particular. They have a lot of interesting products in the works as we speak, and we're really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
And next we have Tamura Designs. For those in the know, Tamura Designs is widely regarded as one of the finest enclosure manufacturers on the planet. They produce outstanding large format vivaria with endless options for customization, drains, UV printed backgrounds, lighting rigs. On top of all of that, they also make amazing deli cup displays for expos and these incredible multi-unit condos, which I use here. So if you're interested in any of that and you decide to make a purchase, use the code Herpetoculture for 15% off one item as a special offer to our listeners only. We also have Happy Dragons. We're really thankful to have the support of Happy Dragons. They are producing some amazing content for bettering our reptile care. And we've been actually partnering with them to produce even more content like webinars. Also, the platform and subscription service offers breeder access to first clutches, things like that. We have online courses coming down the pipeline. In addition, we have live Q&As with reptile experts, such as Mariah Healy from Reptiphiles. It's truly an outstanding subscription package that also offers discounts on their supply partners, such as Ovipost and Joss's Frogs. It's really an outstanding product. So check it out. And let us know what you think.
And last but not least, if you're interested in supporting the show directly with something of a tip or a monthly donation, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/projectherpetoculture. We have a monthly live chat there with all of our paid subscribers. That's been a whole lot of fun so far. We also have a whole line of merchandise like t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and more on our website. And of course, sharing the show with a friend, subscribing on YouTube, and keeping up with social media is always very helpful.
And with all that said, we're on to the show. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Project Herpetoculture, I've just been informed, episode number 75, which is an absolute mind blower for me. We're 3/4 of the way to a hundo. That's pretty nutty. And then our guest today is Mike Lardis. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I really, really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate you both for having me on.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, man.
So we want to get into some as much as we can while we have you. But let's start with. We'd really love to know a little bit about your origins in herpetoculture. Like, how did all this start for you, and how did it develop into what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. So I would say I grew up on the East Coast of the United States in Maryland, and my father was a Navy captain, so that's why we ended up here. And he specifically he worked for the Office of Naval Research. So he was always an aquatic ecologist by education, specifically limnology, which is the study of freshwater systems and things.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So he, as a kid, we would go hiking, go fishing, and it was usually, fishing, right? We were fishing and usually we wouldn't catch anything. So he's like, let's go for a hike. And we would, and we'd go around streams and he would kick over a log and say, these are the animals that live here, et cetera, et cetera. And up until then, I already had an interest in reptiles. So I was keeping, things like anoles and things like that. Again, this is probably the mid 80s. And when we went on one of these little excursions, he ripped over a rock or a log. I can't really remember what, but there were little redback salamanders, which are, and I didn't understand at the time what a salamander was. I'm like, oh, it's a lizard. He's like, nah, this isn't a lizard. This is a salamander. It's an amphibian. It breathes through its skin. And he starts going off because he's, a scientist. And that's kind of that's like my first memory, I think, of caudates and really getting into amphibians. And then obviously learning more about frogs and toads. I already knew what they were, but I didn't know that they were all related. And so the hobby kind of grew. We had a pet store back then, and the rules aren't what they are today. So I was getting things like tiger salamanders and rough skin newts and things like that. And I was probably keeping them not great. I mean, I didn't have a lot of them die, but I didn't have the naturalistic setups, and I probably had a lot of interspecies mingling, which is, frowned upon by some folks. And this is, again, I was probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I just kept growing. I mean, it just didn't stop. I was so interested in it. I was keeping them all almost all the way through high school. When I went to college, I kind of stopped because I went to school in Ohio. So, but as a kid too, outside of my father, my aunt up in Ohio, actually, her 2 sons were both into herpetology. One of them is actually a oh God, I'm forgetting the he studies insects.
Entomologist.
He's an entomologist. He worked at the Cleveland Natural History Museum, and so he and I would go out all the time, herping and looking for salamanders and things. And so that kind of also kept me interested in it, because we would take multiple trips up to Ohio.
Yeah.
And so it was great. And then, but I went to college and it kind of just died off. I just, was in college doing my thing, and I was still interested in it, but I wasn't keeping anything at this point. And then when I went to school, I graduated in finance and accounting, and I worked in New York City for a long time and was working 80, 90 hours a week. And, so I wasn't keeping anything because I couldn't even really keep myself. And it was kind of a crazy time, but great. Also, I mean, I got a lot of great hiking excursions in the Adirondacks and things, kind of getting out of New York City. And every time I would do that, I would always look for salamanders and other amphibians. And obviously I wasn't keeping them, but I was still looking for them. And it was great. So I was always, the hobby never really died off. It just, I truly didn't have the time for many, many, many years. And so it wasn't really until probably right before the pandemic, a couple of years after I got married, that I started to get back in. I was like, I'm going to do this. I've got a house. I've got space. Like, let me get some salamanders or do something. And at this point, I was looking back at kind of towards the end of my keeping and the end of high school, where it was bioactive in the sense that I had living plants and moss and things like that, and aquatic plants, but I wasn't like, I've got to get springtails and isopods. I mean, I had no idea that, what those things even did back then. And so I, to my wife's dismay, I started to build a tank in our basement. And she was like, what the hell is this? I was like, oh, this is this hobby I never told you about. I was like, sorry. Like, I guess I omitted that before we got engaged. But so I did. I set up a tank for it was a paludarium. I set it up for newts. I didn't even have anything in it for about a year, and it wasn't until the pandemic had started that a friend of mine had gotten some eastern newts. Like the red spotted newt, the yellow newts that are pretty common here on the East Coast. And it was like, hey, Mike, my daughter has these. We collected them from the wild 8 months ago. We don't know what we're doing. So do you want them? I said, sure. And they live here in Maryland. So I took them, and that's how I started again. I had these newts, and, over the past, 4 or 5 years, been upgrading the tanks, and just obviously it's just kind of exploded from there. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's great, man.
In a nutshell, yeah. Sorry, it's the 2,000-foot overview of the history of my herping background.
Yeah, no, that's
perfect.
That's exactly what we want to hear. I mean, so something that I really just keep, it's not really a question, it's just more of a statement. I mentioned this a little bit before we started recording. Like, I was born in Connecticut, and some of my first herp encounters were all with flipping rocks and finding salamanders in the backyard. And it's kind of funny because it never, even though I tried to keep them sometimes, I would bring them into the house, and I would get these coffee jars. My parents would have Folgers coffee or whatever.
Right.
They would punch holes in the top of the coffee jars, and I'd fill it with dirt and moss, and I'd try to keep the salamanders in there, and I'd bring them inside, and my parents they'd be like, what? They would just find them all over the place.
Right.
I had pretty much free reign over the garage. So, I would just find the cans, and then I'd go punch holes into the screwdrivers, and I'd be like, all right, let's go. And, but it's really funny. Like early on, it never really crossed over. For some reason, I never had a connection between what I was finding near me and actually setting them up in any kind of way that mimicked their natural environment, even though, in the same house, my mom once got me a pet iguana. You know what I mean? Like, she got like a baby iguana, and I was like, right. Oh, I should put trees in the tank, and let's give it plants and all that. Just for some reason, there was never a connection for me that my local herps were also herps of intrigue, right?
Yeah, exotic animal. I mean, yeah, the iguana was probably more exotic, or
Yeah, I think maybe that had something to do with it, right? But I'll tell you what. A really special feeling always comes over me when I see gray skies, leaf litter, moss, scattered logs, and a little bit of light rain. I always get this really nostalgic, emotional feeling. And so it's one of the reasons I've started following along with the really great work that you do, but that's one of the reasons I started following you, is because you post a lot of really excellent imagery, not just of what you're doing inside, but of what you're finding outside. And so one of the things I'm kind of curious about is from when you started getting back into the hobby, when did it become something that you decided, all right, well, I'm going to start sharing this, and I'm going to start talking about this in a way where it relates not just to what I'm finding, but what and how we're keeping inside?
Yeah. So, right. Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, I can't remember. I started watching, again, this is probably during the pandemic. I've got this tank set up, and it's nice, but it's not like the stuff I'm making today, but it was, it was pretty solid. I was watching videos of just how habitats are created, and not just from people on YouTube, but also aquariums, zoos. How are they, a lot of them are using, a lot of them have standards they have to use. A lot of them don't use necessarily real materials because it'll rot and things like that. So they're using I don't know, things from universal rocks, let's say, that type of.
Yeah.
And so I started just kind of researching that and saying that's great. I mean, but I like salamanders. Would that work for? Yeah, it would probably work for salamanders. But when I go out and I find salamanders, where do I find them?
Yeah.
It's usually under a bunch of leaf litter, moss, rotting wood, nasty stuff. There's mushrooms growing everywhere. I mean, that's kind of and so I was like, how can you recreate these really epic scenes that you find in the wild in a little glass box? And so and again, so I was an equity analyst. I was a research analyst on Wall Street. That's what I did. So I was laser focused on figuring everything out, making sure I know X, Y, Z, 1, 2, how everything's connected. And so I'm like, if I'm going to do this, if I want to set up something that actually looks like outside, inside, how do I do that?
Yeah.
And so I started watching people like, I'll throw props to people like Tanner Serpa and Troy Goldberg.
Yeah.
People, I don't keep dart frogs, but Troy Goldberg does an amazing job making these naturalistic habitats for dart frogs. Right. And there's other folks too. There's a lot of people who do it, but and I think I started kind of watching videos like that and just saying, all right, well, nobody does this for salamanders or newts. There's the videos here or there, but nothing that's really captures kind of where I find these animals in their natural environment. And so I started just trial and error. I just started doing it. Before I started filming anything, I started just kind of like, screwing around with tanks, learning how to drill glass, which was interesting. The local pet store liked me because I was just buying 1 10-gallon after the other, just to practice drilling.
Sure.
And because I don't like, for my new tank, for instance, I had a big filter in there, and it just, I'm like piling rocks up. It starts to look not natural because I'm just trying to hide it. And so it was like, how can I get things out? How can I maximize the real estate in here for an animal to give them as much space as possible? And I was always of the opinion that you should do more for your animal. I don't care if you have one or if you have two. The more space, the more, whether it's vertical or horizontal or whatever it is. I'm lucky. I'm able to finance this stuff myself, this hobby, and I'm able to get this stuff. And so I just kept trying, and some of the stuff was pretty, like, I'm like, all right, I'm throwing this away. This there's no way to salvage this. Learning to work with things like foam and cork board, like the cork panels, silicone, just finding the right stuff. I don't want to kill the animals either, making sure that the rocks I get are cleaned and they don't have some kind of weird chemical in it, testing the water, making sure the temperature is right. And you're going through all this, and it's really a science experiment at the end of the day is what it is. Oh, and making sure that what I'm setting up is going to mimic as closely as possible. And so then to your point of when do I want to start? I started filming it. I was just like using my iPhone. It was just, kind of pretty as basic as you can get. And just, okay, here's a tiger salamander enclosure. Here's, do one for a red salamander. And I'm still, I've got some better equipment now, but the time and the amount of time, you guys probably know, editing and doing X, Y, Z to make it good. And like you want people to listen to it or to watch it. So it's a work in progress. If I had unlimited time, I'd do this all day. I wouldn't do my job. I'd just build tanks for people or for aquariums or zoos or whatever. That's the dream. If I could do that, I would drop everything else in 2 seconds. It's just, it takes time to get to a point like that. But anyways, it's fun. And I wish I could do more, but right now I don't even know. I might have close to 20 tanks going, maybe more than that.
Wow. Nice.
It's taking over, but yeah,
So with that in mind, like, I guess how have you found this whole endeavor of like sharing all of this online? And, you said there weren't a lot of people necessarily that were doing this for salamanders and newts in particular. Right. It was tended to be more dart frog focused, and which is great, like obviously I'm kind of of the opinion that I want to see more like this for everything, right? Like I want to see people doing this for nonsense, like stuff that nobody thinks about. But so how have you? It seems like you've been doing this for a little while. Your channel and all the places that you put out content have grown substantially. What has been sort of like the general reaction and feedback to what you're doing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people. There's the audience is mainly US, but there's a lot of folks globally. I think the main questions I usually get, and this is probably with anybody, they're like, where do you get the salamanders? And I'm always like, I'm like, I get them from a breeder if I can, a good breeder, and I'll pay. I don't care what it costs. I will pay for captive bred salamanders or newts if I can get them. I can collect them legally, but that's kind of the main question.
Yeah.
But I do get a lot of. There's a lot of people who are like man, this is great. I mean, there's not a lot, but there's a handful of people that are like, I've been looking for this. People who are part of the salamander groups on Facebook and things like that wanted it, like a care guide. I don't know, for a red salamander. People are always asking me to create care guides for things and stuff like that, and that's kind of a collective. I mean, sometimes I don't know all the answers. I'm not a scientist, so a lot of times I'm reaching out to the breeder who I got the salamander from, like, hey, for this or that, like, what do you think? Like, how, if they're breeding, like, how do I answer this question? Or how, if they're sick, is this really fungal, or is this bacterial, or is this actually some virus? I mean, so I just talk to people who are smarter than me about this to do it. And that's really kind of, I take that kind of collective consciousness into what I do. And I just put it out there because I want people to have this information. And so I think people really like it. Not a lot of, I hardly ever get any negative feedback. It's more like a lot of questions like, hey, I want to build one of these too. Should I, what temperature should I keep it? I live in Florida. Do you think it's going to be too warm? Do I need to get a chiller? And, things like that. And I try to answer every single question as soon as it comes in, just kind of a sense of, it's just kind of a policy for me. I'm just going to get, because people are taking the time to listen and watch the video. I'm going to answer their question. It's not always going to get answered in 24 hours, but I'm going to get back to them. So,
Right.
Yeah. That's super cool, man. It seems like that could be kind of rare. A lot of folks, don't want to take the time, but I'm of a similar mind with it. If someone's taking the time to reach out, if they're, coming with good faith, it's like, for sure, you want to dignify that with a response at least.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's usually, I mean, they're going to be better off for it in the hobby, right? If they're going to keep people like this, they're not necessarily, I mean, they're not popular, quirky little animals, and there's not a lot of great information out there. I mean, it's getting better, but if somebody is going to actually keep them, I want them to be armed with as much knowledge, at a minimum, be armed with as much knowledge as possible, just so they can make the best decisions for what they're going to keep or how they're going to keep it, so the animal has, the best chance for a good life. I mean, that's kind of the goal.
Sure. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting. This is something that I feel like comes up relatively regularly, not just for me within herpetoculture, but also in some of the other things that I do, such as managing this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy. We have a lot of people who, we have a whole front desk staff, and one of the things that you do when you're working the front desk is you're dealing with customers all the time. You're dealing with members, right? Clients. And I think that when that's all you do, you can sometimes get a little bit, I don't know what the word is, like tired of it, right? Yeah, but fatigued, right? Fatigued. Yeah. And I think that the same thing happens here in herpetoculture in a way that can be challenging, right? Like, you guys both can relate to this and understand this. You can put all your effort into putting out as much content and as much information as you can, and you'll, no matter how much you do, you're still going to get continued repeat questions. Yeah. And it can be difficult sometimes when you get asked a question that you've answered 500 different ways in 500 different avenues.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do feel like, even though this is something that's obviously near and dear to my heart, I do this all the time. I'm like, what temperature should I keep my Uromastix basking zone at? I'm like, okay, and it's like, look, if I get asked that question 100 times, I'm confident in saying that 90 times I answer it well. But then there are probably 10 where I'm like, oh my God, dude, I've answered this question. So, like, read my care guide, watch my YouTube, check out my Instagram. I've been on podcasts, answered this, but I obviously never do it in a way where I'm like, you're an idiot, dummy, you know?
Right.
I feel like this is super important because I think you and I, or all three of us, remember a time when and even now, I think sometimes the norm is for people to be real grumpy, right? Like, I feel like it's an expectation when you reach out to someone about animals, about what they're doing, you kind of have an expectation that they might be a little sassy with you, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
And then when people reach out to you, not only do they have that same expectation, but I often expect there's a certain level of spiciness that people will sometimes initiate the conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, like, I feel like I've developed pretty decent strategies for like reminding myself this person is acting in good faith. This person probably doesn't recognize that the way they're asking the question is rude or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And all of that said, you still get individuals where it's like, boy, man, I'm really like putting in every effort here to like turn the temperature down on the conversation, and you're just keeping it up here at high,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. This is just something I'd be curious to get your guys' thoughts on, because again, I think there's an aspect of this that's super important for the future and for the development of herpetoculture, in that we just, like, I feel like in some ways we feel responsible for setting an example for how to do this better in the future. Yeah. Open there for what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I definitely. I mean, yeah, it can be fatiguing. A lot of times I'll be like, hey, they're like, I don't know, I'll post a update on my cave salamander enclosure, and they're like, oh, I would love to see more of this. And I'm like, all right, well, like, let me think here. Copy and paste the link for my video that I built it. How did you make the walls? Boom. Now you're going to watch my video. I'm going to get one more, one more view. I'm going to earn 1 cent, to buy crickets. It is just like, so I'm starting to get into like a rhythm of how do I reply to some of this stuff. But yeah, there is a crankiness. The caudate, the salamander world, because I'm not in any of the frog or any of the reptile kind of forums or circles. But I know with the salamanders, there's a couple people. I mean, everyone's got good intentions, right? At the end of the day, they all have good intentions. They're all good people. They're all smart. But there is a lack, I would say, of patience, I think, for newbies that come in. Someone's like, oh, I found this salamander outside, and how do I make it? People are like, let it go right now. People just like, no, you don't know what you're doing. And it's like, they're coming from a good place, but they're just barking it out. And it's just like, they don't know. That's why they're on here. They're asking. I never get involved in that stuff, like, these Facebook groups. And no one ever jumps down my throat, but it could, because it's like, but there is a lot of that. And I think the people learn, but it is a kind of people get really short really quick with how they respond. And, it's like, in my mind, I mean, sometimes there are people who just are kind of ignorant and they don't care, and that's bad. And so they kind of deserve it. But most of the people they're like, I don't know what to do. That's why they're like, I found salamander help and Utes on Facebook. Like, they don't know what they're on there because they like, it says help. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
That's like why they're there. And so I'm like, just give them good info, and a lot of times people point them in the right direction. Like, hey, go to caudata.org. It's a website set up. There's so much information. Like, just get on there, navigate. People will try to answer your questions. But, it's social media too. Like, like we're all talking right now. This is different. Like when someone sends a message, it's like, it's hard to read tone sometimes in a text or in an email.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like, and like I was telling you, I grew up in the 80s. So I love social media for some things I hate it. For me, it's like, I've just learned to, sometimes I get emails or messages or comments on, YouTube, and I'm like, what's this person saying? I'm like, and I'm just like, I'll just answer it, whatever, just answer it. I'm just kind of factual and, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I'm out, I just don't even entertain when people do kind of, like to your point, raise the temperature. Cause I just don't have the capacity and the energy to deal with it. I've got so many other things going on. Like if I can answer the question in a good way and then spend more time down in my animal room and clean out another tank and sketch out an idea for a new one, like I'd rather spend the time doing that than back to ping ponging with somebody. I know exactly what you're saying. Like they're in every group. There's always going to be comments and people like that so it can be frustrating, but yeah, for sure.
I feel similarly about it all. I mean, I think that, my approach with it is typically to be as like forthcoming as I can be, and I do, for most of the stuff I'm keeping, I've written articles on, about it. And so I'll link an article and be like, oh, like I'll answer the question. And I'll say, also, I wrote an article, you might want to check it out, which might save me some time for the next 5 questions,
Right.
Potentially. sometimes, they don't read the article. They ask me questions anyway, in which case they'll say, oh yeah, it's in the article, but here's the answer.
Like see below.
Yeah, exactly. But like, I really feel for like newcomers to herpetoculture because, the reality is I think that herpetoculture it's incredibly complex and nuanced and interdisciplinary, and you're just not going to be an expert in it right away. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's just an unreal expectation to think that a newcomer is going to just have it all figured out, and it's also an unrealistic expectation to expect a newcomer to be able to parse apart the good information from the bad right at the outset, because there's the problem with, the internet and social media is that the algorithm doesn't distinguish between what's quality and what's not. It's just, it's all accessible. It's all out there. There's tons of information, but without a good bullshit detector, without good filters, it's not much good.
Yeah.
And so,
it's a great point. Like a video of I don't know, like a African bullfrog or, eating a axolotl, or like, I just saw someone post like this stupid stuff. But that gets 8 million views because people have morbid curiosity. Like, oh, I want to see that.
Yeah, totally.
You can't unsee it after. Like, I don't want to watch it, but like, that's stuff. It's clickbait, right?
Exactly.
It's not my thing. Like I said, I'm, but yeah, it's there's good and bad information, and it's surprising sometimes to see people who, they're like, someone's like, hey, I've got this salamander. I got it at a, I don't know, like a Repticon or something like that. It's a tiger salamander. It's legal in my state. I did that research, but, what temperature should I keep it? Someone's like, it's got to be really cool. Like, okay, that's good. And all of a sudden someone's like, you should get a heat lamp just in case. I'm like, no, forget a heat lamp. It's like, and all of a sudden it's just like, so there is, it is, you have to be able to filter through the nonsense.
Totally. Yeah.
And so I agree with you. It's a good point.
Yeah. It can get complicated real fast. And so, just in light of all that, I try to be as gentle with people as I can be. And like, I have a pretty similar approach as it relates to negativity, which is just not really to indulge it. I'm just like, I don't really have time for this.
Yeah.
I just don't, especially because a lot of times, if someone's going out of their way to make a negative comment, more often than not, they're not really interested in having like a rational discussion about it in the first place. And so it's just kind of like, I cut my losses at that point. But
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I mean, all that said, I'm curious. I like that on your Instagram, your little like profile at the top, you describe yourself as an artist.
Yeah.
And you also, earlier you mentioned, sketching out, scapes, and, your YouTube channel is Slithering Salamander Scapes. It's very clear that you're approaching what you do with like you said like earlier, that analytical mind and, an eye for detail and all of that. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about that, like how you perceive this intersection between herpetoculture, the keeping side, and art.
Yeah.
Because that's something we talk about a lot, but I don't hear often talked about aside from in our little echo chamber here.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I'll caveat all this. I am not a good artist by sketching, but real basic stuff, like square and, I think, it's a great question. For me, it is, again, going out into nature, into the wild, to where these animals live, whatever it is that I want to set up for, and actually finding these habitats, taking pictures, tons of pictures. Like, I have tons and tons of pictures. I have to pay however much for Apple every month because all this, I pay like $20 a month for all the extra gigabytes because I don't want to get rid of it. So I have other, hard drives of just pictures of habitat with nothing else but just habitat. And what I do is I look at these, I'm like, all right, I found a red salamander here during this time of the year. It was X feet away from the water. And I found a long-tailed salamander here. I found it near this rock wall with liverworts and moss growing on it. And I'm like, all right, I really love these. I'll just choose a salamander, right? And I'm like, how can I mimic this? How can I make it mimic it so it looks great and it looks naturalistic and it looks really cool? But but it meets the animal's needs. That is the challenge, because everyone loves moss. Moss looks great, but like sometimes you don't find salamanders just under a patch of moss. They're under a bunch of leaf litter and rotted wood and rocks and gravel and all this other stuff. So it's just like, how do you like put it all together and make sure, because the most important thing is that the habitat that you're setting up for the animal is appropriate. You know, it's how's it going to thrive? How is it going to, because other people from zoos and stuff have told me this before, but the more naturalistic the setting, the more behaviors the animal exhibits that you wouldn't otherwise see. And I believe that. I mean, if they're living, you know, if it's ingrained in their DNA, if they're living in an environment that they're meant to live in, you're going to see a lot more of the behavior. I mean, if you put a salamander in a tank with a bunch of fake rocks and fake plants and it just sits on a rock under an LED light all day, like he's probably just going to sit there because he doesn't know what to do. Yeah. So for me, it's trying to mesh all that together and weave it together into a cohesive project that has the appropriate elements for the animal to thrive, but also that looks naturalistic and it looks like the pictures that I have, or somewhat, right? You know, because again, I'm taking something that's, 10 feet by 15 feet and I'm putting it into, 3 feet by 2 feet, so it's like, it's a challenge. It's fun. I mean, it's like, it's like any other hobby that you want to get good at. It just takes time. But yeah, that's kind of how I look at this. Every single project that I do, every single build, whether it's a 10-gallon tank or a 150-gallon tank, that's what I do. I'm like, what is this? What is going to look cool? But what is right? What is the right thing? Can it look cool and be right and look like where I would actually find this animal? And if, where you find the animal is like again, like he might be under, or the animal, the salamander or newt might be under leaf litter 90% of the time, and everything else looks cool. And I'm walking over it most of the time in the woods because I don't even know it's there. But they're secretive animals. They're not. They're just. It's a weird subsegment of herpetoculture. Of keeping these types of amphibians, because they're not always out.
Totally. But is there something that draws you to salamanders specifically? Because I mean, obviously, that's what you're working with primarily is caudates. So
yeah.
What about salamanders specifically, as opposed to other amphibians or, the reptiles that are more commonly kept?
I don't know. I don't. I don't know why. I don't know why I have a fascination with them. I think they're, they're just interesting. They're secretive. Like if I go out and I hike in the woods, I can find a million frogs. I mean, domestically here. I can find leopard frogs. I can find pickerel frogs. I can find bullfrogs, green frogs, American toads, what have you. I can find all that stuff. And you just have to look for them, but they're there. Salamanders, you don't just see them walking around unless it's nighttime or it's dusk and it's raining and all the. And I think because to me as a kid they were just more elusive, and so to see one was a treat because you had it's like looking for buried treasure. You gotta get your hands dirty. Oh, yeah. Not that you have to do with frogs. To be totally honest with you, if I had enough room and enough time, I would have every type of amphibian I'd be allowed to have. I want mossy frogs. I want dart frogs. I want tomato frogs. I mean, I love all this stuff. Yeah. I would want to keep all of it, but show people how you do it. Like if I had the time in the space, oh my gosh, I would. And I like reptiles too. I think for me, it's easy to keep temperate domestic species because I have a big room in my basement. That's about it's like 65 degrees.
Perfect for amphibians. Yeah.
I don't have to mimic the temperature too much. It's just kind of more of a, just kind of efficient and just easy.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, if I wanted to pull in dark, I mean, I would have to heat something up. I would have to have a different area. Not that I won't do that eventually, because I would like to get into other things because I do. Reptiles I really like. I just don't. I think I'm just more glued to amphibians right now. I did have someone reach out to me after they saw one of my videos and wanted me to build an enclosure for an anaconda. And I was like, if I could fly out there, it was actually somebody in California. I don't even know if you're allowed to keep them out there. And I was like, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could take a month off of work to build this for you, but if you pay me enough, maybe I would. But it's I think just building habitats for amphibians and reptiles in general is awesome. I mean, if I could do that for a career, I would do it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
It's so satisfying escaping something out. It's something I enjoy almost as much as the animals themselves, is setting up the habitats and going through the whole build process. It's really fun. I totally relate to that. And I really like what you said about just like, salamanders being kind of like these, elusive, secretive creatures. And there's something kind of enigmatic about them, and I love the, like where I live, a lot of the species will, and elsewhere, of course, they'll migrate to their natal ponds every year with the heavy rains. And that's always like an event that I'm like looking forward to every year, is like the first really heavy rains when the tiger salamanders and the California newts start moving.
Yeah.
I just yesterday actually was leading a hike for a bunch of youth who were in California for the first time.
Nation's youth.
And and they were talking a lot about newts because they had seen a bunch of California newts on the crawl, and because it's been raining really heavily. And, I was telling them, I was like, these things can live like 25, 30 years. And every year they return to their natal ponds, and and we're not entirely positive about how they navigate, but they somehow are able to navigate, or sometimes miles, to their natal ponds. And they're all just like completely blown away. It's so cool just to encounter this little creature that can do that.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, rough skin. I mean, I had those as a kid too. I love those. Those are awesome animals. They're the orange bellies and they're such cool animals. And I remember having I don't think I had those for the entire time that I had them, and I had to go give them away to a friend or something when I left to go to college, because they were like, they're probably still alive. I haven't talked to this guy. I mean, they probably outlived me. I mean, they were really cool animals, and it is cool. I mean, they do. I mean, they're not just like, amphibians are interesting. I mean, they've got the spotted salamanders, rough skin newts, tiger salamanders. I mean, they know what they're doing. I mean, they go on these migration patterns and to their vernal pools or whatever to lay eggs, and it's really awesome. It's a cool thing. It's cool that you get to take youth out there to show them that, because I don't even think I knew that until I was older.
Oh yeah, totally. I knew that they migrated and stuff like that, but I had no idea. Like when I first heard that they could live like that long, it blew my mind. I was like, no freaking way. Like that's
vernal pools. Charlie, the guy who had
vernal pools.
Yeah. Man, it's wild. It's so funny because like, even though when I go herping, most of the time my targets are reptiles, like I'm usually looking for snakes and lizards. My stoke level goes through the roof when I find an amphibian. You know what I mean? I'm just like, whoa, like, cause they they totally blow my mind. I'm like, I don't even, for example, like the two that I see most commonly out here, I guess maybe three, but here in Colorado, every person I know who lives in the foothills or in the mountains is like, oh, we have a tiger salamander that showed up in our window well.
Yeah, right.
Man. And and they just blows their mind, because like it blows my mind really, because for so long, I never conceived of a tiger salamander as something that would live up in the mountains, like my employee, Brendan, he'll talk about finding, he tells me a story sometimes of finding a tiger salamander at night during a snowstorm in a prairie dog hole. And you're like, what? Like, what?
Yeah.
Like what, dude? It just, maybe this is not counterintuitive in any way to people who know better, but to me, that's the kind of stuff that just baffles me. I'm like, you're the weirdest creature in the world, finding spadefoot toads out here on the plains, like, what is going on with these weird little freaks,
Yeah. Especially the fossorial genus, like the tiger salamanders. They don't even, sometimes they'll do, but they use existing mammalian holes in the ground, like prairie dogs. And so we have them here in Maryland, and they're like critically endangered, but they're actually, it's funny. So I live, near the Annapolis area, but if you go over the Bay Bridge, which goes over the eastern shore of Maryland, then there's the Atlantic Ocean and everything. That's actually the only place that they live in Maryland anymore. is over there closer to, which is crazy. It's like it's a more of the loamy kind of substrate with sand, but that's where their vernal pools are over there. And over here, I don't think one's been found over in the mainland part of Maryland in like forever. I mean, like they're just not here.
Wow, man.
And so, but yeah, they are really, really out. I mean, they're. I love tiger salamanders. It's like one of my favorite. I actually, back when in the 80s, I actually had a California tiger salamander, the black ones with the white spots.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you were allowed. They weren't endangered back then, I guess. I had one, and really, really cool animals. I think there's still a decent amount, but I think there've been crossbreeding with like other type, like maybe blotched or other Western tiger salamanders.
Yeah.
So there's hybrids now. I
totally
you know better than me out there, but it's
there's certain populations where that's happening, and now, I mean, they're critically endangered now. Actually, where I grew up there's a population, and it's like it's like half the people in the county hate them because they stop all kinds of development projects because but it's like the rest of us are stoked because they're amazing animals, and like their habitat. I mean, it's reduced to like literally a handful of vernal pools that remain, in this plain where I grew up. And I used to go out every year in November in the first heavy rain, and I would move them off the road, because they would just be crossing the road, and such cool animals. But I wish they're more abundant here.
But it's sad to hear that they're that endangered. I mean, it's and you're right. Like to your point, like even if there was captive breeding programs to re-release them and things like that.
Yeah.
Like, where are they going to go? I mean, it's
right.
Like,
totally.
Is there enough suitable habitat out there in the original place where they came from? I don't know. It's like, it's screwed up. I mean, it's the same problem here. I mean, they were at one point, I think they were all over Maryland, and you could probably find them anywhere, but there's been so much development because of, the proximity to DC, roadways, pollution. It's just, it's poisoning the land. I mean, honestly,
totally.
I mean, I'm for development and stuff, but in a responsible way. I mean, it's not
right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You always want some level of, you always like have this optimistic hope for some level of balance between like development, progress, and conservation and sustainability. And it seems so difficult to achieve in one way, shape, or form or another. Odd, weird tidbit about tiger salamanders. I read somewhere that all of the existing axolotl population in captivity has some percentage of tiger salamander DNA in them.
Probably.
That's so wild, man. Like I mean, and I should probably come out and just say this, like, amphibians in every way are not I have so little understanding of amphibians. You know what I mean? They're amazing. I love them, but for some reason, my passion has stayed fairly tightly relegated to specifically to lizards, and then to a lesser extent, tortoises and snakes. But like, doesn't mean I don't love amphibians. It's just like, I say this out of embarrassment and insecurity, right? No, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I wish I knew more about various amphibians and things like this. So something I wanted to point out earlier too, and I know this will kind of backtrack us just a tiny bit, which is, you mentioned like, oh, I'm not very good at sketching or whatever. And it's like, none of that matters at all. And take that as someone who, like, I have an art degree. Like, I went to college for art, and I worked with an artist for a while. Like, Oscar Wilde famously said that art imitates life and life imitates art. And the fact that you're kind of getting out there and like taking snapshots of the natural terrain and then sort of replicating that in a box and making an effort to sort of like beautify and like match it in a way, that's an artistic practice. I mean, just because you're not doing it with pen and paper or pencil and paper or paint and canvas or whatever, I mean, it's literally the same practice. It's identical. It's just because we're never going to get the exact thing necessarily, but we're always kind of making some weird facsimile of it. I think it's super cool that you do that. I mean, I love seeing those snapshots on your Instagram where you take a little snapshot and it's a picture of some habitat and you're like, I'd love to recreate this. And it's like this, it's beautiful. It's so fun to take these little frames. There's something so imaginative and magical and mysterious about taking something like that and importing it into the the indoors. I was watching I was just watching this Patagonia documentary about some of the rough aspects of salmon hatchery farming.
Interesting.
And part of why I'm watching this is because I've recently gotten into fly fishing, over the last 3-4 months. And I fished a lot when I was a kid. And then when I was on my, just after my wedding, my wife and I visited Mount Chabonneau Trout and Salmon Hatchery in Colorado. And so I found like there was all this stuff that I was really inspired by and really motivated by and really impressed by. And then this documentary is talking about, all these sort of maybe, this handful of maybe not so great effects of some of those things. So I'm just like, fuck. But, but
is that Damnation that you watched?
No,
which one was that?
Artificial. And it's artificial.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a guy in there who's talking about, the sort of like the extinction of various charismatic species, such as like orca and salmon and whatnot. He says that he says something to the effect of, we will never engineer our way out of a deficit of spirit. And I like that to me, that deficit of spirit, that hit home. That to me, that really hit me right in the heart, because I feel like in some ways, that's part of why we do what we do, is to sort of remedy this deficit of spirit in a way. And so anyway, all of that ramble was to sort of ask you a little bit about like, how do you kind of square, or do you even wrestle with or square with yourself this thing where, well, you're herping and you're seeing the thing in the natural world, and then you're also sort of keeping it indoors. And we always, every one of us, if I don't think we're being thoughtful members of herpetoculture or herpetology if we're not occasionally wrestling with the sort of like the weirdness around what we do. Whereas we'd love to see these things outside, but we're actually inside. So I'm just curious, sort of how you think about that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, all the time, actually. Like especially like if I keep red salamanders, right? So I'll go out and I'll find them, and I'm like, wow, this one, it's weird. It's like a double-edged sword, because I'm like, this is where they're supposed to be here, not inside, not in my basement, and it's a weird thing. Like I almost one day, if I had the funds and everything, would want to just, everything that I have, I would want to kind of either have my own, not a museum, but like exhibit, this is for amphibians.
Like a gallery.
I'm not collecting. Yeah, and everything's being captive bred, but because I do have some stuff that was legally collected from the wild, as eggs or tiny larvae. But I do wrestle with that. I mean, I don't think I did when I was younger. I think now it's more of a kind of a mind wrestle for me, because it's not, part of me is like, that's not right. You should never do that. And then part of me is like, well, I do know they're developing something over here, and there's going to run. It'll probably get a better life, but that's just psychologically me saying, trying to rationalize what I'm doing. And so, I agree. It's a tough thing. I mean, like when I can, and there's not a lot, I mean, as like there's salamanders, it's really tight with what you can keep state by state. You can't move certain things over state lines. I mean, which is a little absurd. I mean, right. Like if there's an exotic vet that works with amphibians and is the best person, and they're over in Virginia, and I have one of these salamanders that's on the injurious species, I can't even go see them. I can't. I legally cannot do that. So there's, anyways, I'm not going to get into that, but I just, there's, I wrestle with things like that. That's why I try to do everything captive bred if I can. There's just not a lot of people that do it.
Totally.
And sometimes people are like, oh, it's captive bred. And I'm like, is it? And the people I deal with, like there's one or two people who are excellent, but they don't, they only have certain species. And here's the other thing too. I haven't mentioned this. I will right now. I've only kept native species. I don't have anything that comes from somewhere else, because I really appreciate what we have here. But to your point, it makes me wonder sometimes, like, well, I'm keeping these things inside. They live in our backyard. Like, why? And part of it is like, well, I'm raising awareness for these cool animals, and I'm doing, which really is true. But part of it is selfishness. I'm like, I want to keep them. Like I want to keep them. So it's if I'm being totally honest, like it is tough. I think my wish in a perfect world, which probably won't happen, is that there would be more people who responsibly breed animals. And at some point, there's absolutely nothing coming from the wild. But will that ever happen? I don't know. I mean, it's like it's tough. It's a tough thing to square in my head. You know what I mean? And it is. It's like it's something. And my wife is she's a big animal lover. I took some tiny little larvae, of long-tailed salamanders, and she's like, that was going to grow up right here in this little pristine pool. I'm like, yeah, or it was going to get eaten by that garter snake, or like whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know, like it's just it is a double-edged sword. It's tough. It's one of my biggest. I don't get a lot of people. I thought I would get some people who would push on that hard. I don't really get a lot of that, but I do for myself because I don't necessarily condone it, but at the same time, I do it sometimes. Like if I really I wanted, there's nobody who breeds long-tailed salamanders, and the only people who did don't do it anymore. And I really, really wanted them for a long time, but I don't want to take adults, right? Because those are the ones that are laying eggs. And so I had to find a place that had some long-tailed salamander eggs that I thought, and I didn't even find the eggs. I just found a little larva in a pool.
Yeah.
And at first I wasn't even sure if they were two-line salamanders or if they were long-tailed. And I'm like, I guess this is it. I was like, hopefully, and they developed into long-tailed salamanders. So I was happy. I literally couldn't tell from the larva. I mean, they just
nice look.
Not smart. I don't have enough of a background. I don't know, and nobody could tell me either with the pictures. People were I don't know.
Super hard to tell with larvae of so many species. It's really tricky.
Yeah. And I mean, I hope it's clear that like I asked that question not to like accentuate the guilt that we all feel from time to time. It was more just more because at the end of the day, I still come down on the side that like I'm doing a good thing. You know what I mean? I couldn't continue to do what I do if I didn't feel that way like I'll tell you what, there's a video of yours and I can't, just bear with me because I don't know what salamander it is.
Yeah, you're fine.
There's a video of yours and it's like you're tongue feeding a waxworm to this little thing. Yeah. And this salamander like is hanging out looking right up at you and like knows what's going. It's so obvious that he knows what's going on.
Yeah.
You're like, dude, you're cool, like that baffles me to a degree because I would never have conceptualized that a salamander would get used to the routine of feeding routines and would come over and be like, hey, where's my waxworm, bro? And I mean, and I feel stupid because every time I think about an example of where like, oh, I wouldn't have expected that. It is almost always raw, unadulterated ignorance on my part, right? And so, dude, well, yeah, go, please.
No. I think I probably just posted that. It was an arboreal salamander.
Yeah, it was arboreal.
Yeah, that's the one.
One of my favorites. They're local to me.
Yeah, out west, right? So those are captive bred. I got them from, again, probably one of the best breeders for salamanders out there. And, but you want to hear something crazy?
Yes.
Almost every single one of my salamanders and any one of my setups, when I go and I open the top, they come out. And they come and they wait for food. Whether they were, collected as larvae or whether they were captive bred, they are conditioned to come out and get food. It's crazy. I mean, it's scary. I mean, I watch it and at first it was like just the tiger salamanders are like dogs. They just come up to the glass and they're just like gluttons. They're just like, feed me, like Little Shop of Horrors, like the plant. Like
totally.
That's the tiger salamanders. But even I have greater sirens. I have red salamanders, spring salamanders, long-tailed salamanders, cave salamanders, slimy salamanders, red-legged salamanders, eastern newts, arboreal salamanders, I mean, you name it, they come out. You
Mhm.
know, at any given point, they will come out and want the food, unless they're sick or, you know, obviously then, you know, I know something might be wrong. Some of them are a little more like the red-legged salamanders will, when I open the lid, I think it's the sound or the vibration, and
Mhm.
they know that's the catalyst for something,
Yep.
crickets or something's coming in there, and they will come out. Their heads will pop out. It's crazy. I mean,
So cool, dude.
it's wild.
So cool because
They're so much more sophisticated than we give them credit for so often, you know.
100%.
That's just true of every animal. I think that's true.
Yeah.
Agreed.
No. Yeah, absolutely, dude. And it's also remarkably that salamander like totally tugged at my heartstrings. I'm like, my God, it's adorable. You know,
Yeah.
I hate, like, sometimes it'll drive me nuts when people come over and they see a baby Uromastis. They're like, oh, it's so cute. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, you know, but like they are, they are. And it's obnoxious how cute they are. But that, the way they look up at you and they're like, "Ugh," you know,
Yeah.
Arboreals too. They've got
Really
those
got me,
oversized jaws, you know.
Yeah.
They're pretty endearing looking little guys.
They got the teeth though, right? You know, they
can chomp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've got, like, look at a picture.
They can draw blood.
Oh yeah, they have like great white teeth. It's, or like mako shark teeth. That's not
Yeah.
great. Like they look like curved and I mean, it's just they like nasty.
They're
little
gnarly.
Yeah. I mean,
all right, I'm looking this up right now.
Yeah,
oh
yeah, they're like, you know, they
bulldogs.
fight each other. So I had a female and two males, and the female unfortunately died. I think it was a bacterial infection. I just don't. I mean, I rarely ever handle my salamanders, but I had to take her out, and it's just one of those things. Like once they start to, I don't know if maybe the tank is moist, or, you know, because they like it drier, and I didn't, you know, they like a drier climate, which is really wild to me. So I have my Mist King kind of just once a day for like 15 seconds, and that's all. You know, other than that, they'll melt. And so, but now I have two males, and they just, I mean, I'm like, one of them will look like their tail's about to be severed because of the bite marks. And so I put them in a bigger enclosure, and it doesn't happen anymore. But it's, you know, they're vicious. Like they're
burly. Yeah. I caught one in my childhood that was 7.5 inches long. It's the biggest arboreal I've ever seen. To this day, I've never seen one close to that size. And it was in the backyard at my grandparents' house under like a tarp. And there were a bunch of females and this big male that was like 7.5 inches long. And my grandmother actually took a terrible photo. I have a photo of it, and it's on a yardstick, so you can kind of see how big it is. But it's just this terrible Polaroid photo.
That's awesome.
You know, but it was like potentially a record-setting arboreal. Like I've never seen one close since then, and I've seen hundreds. You know.
Yeah,
they're gnarly.
They're really cool animals. I would love if they. I wish the female was alive, because again, I don't try to breed my animals, by the way. I keep the temperature relatively stable. I don't try to. Now, my cave salamanders randomly just laid eggs, which is really cool. And those are also captive bred from the same guy. And so I have them, you know, I had to suck the, you know, like a turkey baster, all the eggs out and everything. And I don't know. I don't really, again, I don't really try for that. But the more I'm kind of doing this, the more I'm like, this is, you know, maybe I should. I can mimic the temperature. I could drop it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
You know, because that's typically what triggers it for a lot of these. So, but yeah,
temperature and precipitation. Yeah, I would think.
Right. Yeah, that's right. You know, it's difficult to kind of hit all the nails on the head, but like, I think a lot of times if you can, you know, even with the temp drop, I think that's what I did. I dropped our nest down to, like, you know, we have a mountain house. We go out to West Virginia on the weekends. It's like, and that's the coolest thing, because we have like 30 acres. It's in the middle of nowhere, it's in the Appalachians. And that's where I get a lot of my inspiration from. It's just, I go out there, I hike, but I dropped the temperature to like 60 degrees. And then I came back and there were eggs. So it was like gone for 3 days. So I wonder if that, you know, that was the kind of the catalyst to get them, you know, into that mode. But anyways, it's the arboreals were great. I mean, there's other really cool species that I just not, you know, again, I live in Maryland. There's captive bred green salamanders. It's endangered in the state, which means that I cannot have obviously one from the wild, which I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
do. But I cannot even get a captive bred one from out of state. You can't
Right.
keep, so I can't, follow the letter of the law. I'm not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So, but there's some really cool people that have bred these. The guy that has them, and then also Nick Stacy, who's got,
Yep.
he's done
telepus and everything. Yeah.
he's done some amazing jobs with breeding amphibians. I mean,
he's a wizard.
Yeah, he really is. I followed his progress with his green salamanders. He's done an amazing job. So, but it is what it is.
I'm pretty sure there are speckled blacks here on my land. The Flavipunctatus, also Enaides. They're really cool. But I haven't seen one yet. But I haven't been here super long. But it seems like the habitat's right. They should be here.
Yeah,
it's hard to imagine because literally it gets 110 degrees where I live in the summer. It's like, how do they do it? It's amazing.
They adapt.
It's incredible.
They adapt. I mean, like that's the other thing I didn't know. I mean, as I started keeping a lot of salamanders, over the past couple of years, there'll be a fungal infection, there'll be a bacterial infection, and a lot of times they'll heal themselves by just getting drier or warmer, or they'll get closer to the light and dry, and they'll be able to regulate their bodies. I mean, it's pretty crazy. And to your point on temperatures, I mean they're pretty adaptable. I've found salamanders so far from water in the driest habitat. And I'm like, how? It's like a little red salamander in a dry rot log, not wet. And I'm like, he's a half a mile from the water. Like I don't. Yeah. But they figure it out. So they are pretty amazing.
Really resilient little creatures.
I have to say, I've mentioned this before on the show, but I have like this kind of ongoing occasional fantasy of like buying Mississippi slimy salamanders somehow. Because I love the way those, like the various fire salamanders from, across the year.
Right.
Those things are nuts. Like those are some of the most incredible creatures I've ever seen. You know, and I feel like they also, in some ways, they kind of fit all the bills for the things that we really regularly tout as great exemplars for herpetoculture, in the sense that they don't have super high requirements for maintenance. Whereas the carbon footprint. I mean, I don't, whatever. Like, say what you will about whether or not it's all that big of a deal, but like it takes a lot to keep a Euromastix alive. Like it takes a lot.
Oh yeah.
Power, there's like the food, it's like they're in the grand scheme, they might be like a relatively low maintenance reptile in the grand scheme of things, like on the lower end of the scale. But like a salamander, it's like you really don't have to do anything,
You have light. I mean, LED light, temperature. Again, I mean, I'm lucky that I have them in the room that I do, that I don't have to mimic the temperature to any degree that's in. The big thing for me is the filters. I mean, I've like Fluval filter after Fluval canister filter. I must have 15 of them going. But it doesn't really drive up the electric cost too much, or I don't really think. But yeah, it's easier. I think again, in the fire salamanders, that's a really cool point. There's actually some folks here who have captively breed them. I haven't gotten into them because again, I'm only right now keeping domestic species, but really, really, really cool colorations and stuff. I've seen, some are like orange and yellow and red, and I mean, it's just like. And it's sad what's happening to those animals in their native habitat with B-sal and everything like that. I mean, that's which again is the crux for why there's all these rules for salamander movement here, which I get. I mean, it's to try to prohibit that from getting. We have the largest salamander diversity in the world. Concentrated within the Appalachian and everything. So I get it. I mean, it is what it is. Will that really prevent it? I don't know. I hope it does. But that's there's definitely some really cool people though breeding fire salamanders. I haven't gotten into it yet. I want to. I mean, I think once I start going outside of the U.S. to start collecting animals, I'm gonna have to build an addition to my house because there's so much cool stuff.
Yeah.
Let's go, dude. Build
Yeah.
that addition.
They're cool. I had a fire salamander as a teenager. I remember it was really cool. I had a handful of things. I had arboreals. I had a tiger that I got as fishing bait when I was in Arizona as a kid.
Oh, as a you got it as a water dog or whatever.
A water dog. Yep, exactly. For like $3. It was like 11 inches long. It was huge.
Oh, what a cool pet though, right?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so cool to watch.
Catch bats. I mean, it's just like. I mean,
So
I guess
wild.
they're abundant in some places, but it's like, I had a lot of water dogs too. Were what I had that eventually turned into tiger salamanders.
So cool.
I had so many of them too. They were different subspecies and stuff. But
Yeah.
Dude, tell me a Mississippi slimy salamander isn't bad to the bone, dude. I mean,
they're awesome.
So
You're
sick.
talking to the wrong guys. We agree with you.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't sound like it. You guys are just kind of just kidding.
I have slimy. I actually have the white spotted slimy salamanders. I got those again as tiny little, because they come out of they're terrestrial salamanders. They came out of the egg like this. I found them and I took 3. I mean, there must have been 80 of them under a log, and I'm not exaggerating. And so I took a couple of them, and now they're huge. I have 3 of them, and they're massive. I've had them for the past, I mean, they were probably like the third species I got, maybe. Like,
oh my God.
They've gotten so big, but I've also fed them a lot. I mean, they're not fat, but they're big. And,
they're beefy.
Yeah, and so 2 females and a male. So they're to your point on how big the arboreal was. I think they're all over 7 inches right now. They're big
cool.
salamanders. But I don't touch them.
Very
I mean,
cool.
I'm so weird about it. One, because anytime I touch any of the salamanders, I put like the gloves on, and but they have that secretion, and it just it's like it'll get all like if I flip a log and out in the mountains or something, and I see one, kind of pick it up for a second. I always have this residue on my hand that I feel like I cannot get off.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting.
So they're really cool animals. I mean, it's I just really do wish though. Like, I mean, now that we were talking about captive bred before and wild. There's just nobody who really does it. Like, I mean, I think what happens is people go out, catch them, and then they say, hey, these are captive bred. And not everybody, but some people do that. They get on like Morph Market or Fauna Classifieds or whatever, and I think I do wish there was a program or people that had the time and the resources to breed these things, because I do think it would make much less of an impact. Because what's happening is I think people are buying this stuff and they're just like, I bought the salamander for $20. I don't know. But people are buying them, and then it creates the demand. So people go out and they're like, oh, well, shoot, I sold 10 of them. I'll go get 20 of them now. And I do think that does impact, like I won't buy them from like a pet store. Do you know what I'm saying? Or like an online, unless it's somebody like I did get some tiger salamanders, but the guy he's known for, he has a big pond on his property where he walls it off. Tiger salamanders are in there, vernal pool. And he was the only guy that was doing it in the US for a while. Now there's people who are successfully doing it. But to be totally honest with you, there's many more people in Europe who have much more success breeding salamanders than here.
Right. Well, I mean, this brings me to like what feels like a pretty important question is like, why not you? Why? I mean, again, I don't, far be it from me to tell you what to do with your time or what your goals are, what your aspirations are. But it seems as though not only is there a, call it a niche to be filled or whatever you want to, however you want to put it. Yeah. Does that kind of thing even interest you? Is that something that you'd even want to pursue, or is that just sort of not your?
It would, if I, like, to your point, if I had the time and more space for breeding tanks and to do it properly. The people that I know that have done it successfully and that are, I would say, very reputable. Mm-hmm. I think what's happened is some of the comments just kind of off the cuff were, there's just not a lot of demand for what they're doing. probably because they're true captive bred animals and they're at a certain price point.
Sure.
And they're not, I think what's happening is people Google, salamander for sale, and they, there's certain online retailers that sell these animals that I wouldn't buy them from, but that's, and they're all wild caught, and it's just a conveyor belt. And so someone's like, well, I can get it for $40. Why would I pay 240? I would pay 240 because I want the responsible, animal. But, I don't even tell you the amount of money I've spent on this hobby, but it's pretty mind blowing, but I would do it. I think that's, I don't think it needs to be super pricey, but I think it needs I've heard this on other podcasts and other people, but you don't want someone to look at it as a throwaway animal. There's a psychological element. Why would I pay $10 for this?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's got to be a price point where someone's like, I invested in this, so I got to do
the right thing. Take care of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I also don't think it should be look, a tiger salamander. Should a tiger salamander be $350? I mean, it's a lot of money. I don't know what people like the fire salamanders, they're expensive, and
sure.
But they're also hard to get, there's not a lot of people here doing it. So it's a supply demand thing,
Well, I mean, so this is partially why I ask to some degree. It's like what I do with the Uromastyx is sort of similar in a way, I will regularly discuss the issue of the fact that so many of these things are brought in as imports.
Yeah.
The 99.9% of all the Euros in captivity are wild caught, period. Mm-hmm. That is the way it is. And you can tell the difference by looking at them from wild caught. Right, especially the more you do it, the more obvious it is to you which ones are captive bred and which ones are not. And even when you're someone like myself who takes pains to give them huge spaces, a really highly varied diet, crazy high powered lighting, like if people saw my power bill, they'd throw up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Solar panels.
Yeah, for sure. Or move to Arizona, right?
Right. Exactly.
But part of the reason I mention this is because there's enough of a demand. It's a combination of there being enough of a demand where it's like, well, I can still produce these things, and there are people who come to me knowing that they're buying an animal that's third, fourth generation captive bred. It's been hand raised since it's a baby to be like a friendly little shit bag. It's like this nice little lizard, and it's going to be good. It's not going to be full of parasites. It's not going to be a pain in the ass. It's not going to have any problems settling into captivity. It's not going to be flighty, the whole thing. And yet I found this really weird phenomenon where people kind of stopped bringing in wild caught ornata for a long time. And the price was $150. And then when they disappeared, I was charging $500 a piece after a few years of breeding them.
Right.
All of a sudden, they go and bring in 1,000 imports and are charging $500 and labeling them captive bred.
Yeah, and it's not.
And it's like
it's garbage. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It is difficult to compete with that. But I feel like there's only so many answers you can have to that kind of thing. In some way, I feel like I have to. I feel like I have to do this because that is so it is fucked. It is, it is fucked up that is the case. And it's such a, but the reality is these animals also come from places where there's either very little in the way of functioning conservation efforts. People are, rightfully so, people are prioritizing the people in those regions over the animals. And I get it. I totally get why people are doing that. And people see them as a resource to exploit, just like oil, just like textiles. That's just what they are.
They're making money. In a lot of times from these areas where a lot of these exotic animals come from, there is a lot of poverty. I mean,
totally. And I don't blame people for that. I don't blame, any of the governments where these animals come from for those choices. I totally get it. Right.
Yeah.
But you'd imagine that given the demand you'd imagine that there, we talked one of the first one early on, like within the first 10 episodes we did an episode with Philippe de Vosgely, right? And Philippe is the goat. He's the man. He's the person who all of us look up to all the, I mean, I don't mean to make him uncomfortable by blowing a bunch of smoke up his ass, but he's the man, And he said something that we repeat all the time on the show, which is the goal should be from few, many.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know why there isn't an importer going ahead and making, doing this to set this as an example. They're going to say, all right, I'm going to do what it takes to get a single shipment of 200 Euromastix McFagnai, which you can't get those because they're from Somalia. It's a failed state, blah, blah, blah. But like you name it, right? I'm going to get 200 of this species that we know are, like everybody wants them. There's high demand. There's going to be a real level of popularity. And we're going to get them. We're going to partner with people who want to dedicate themselves to these things. In order to put down money, you have to put down a certain amount of money just to get your spot reserved. And then you have to pay us a portion of your offspring for the first 5 years. That way we're not going to bring in any more. We're going to get a consistent income. So therefore we are incentivized to take good care of these things, ensure that they're going to the right homes with people who are going to propagate them. And then the fact that we get a little bit of money for the next 5 years of propagation means that we're not going to bring in any more for at least 5 years. Like, why wouldn't you do this? Like the market that we have for herpetoculture is so developed and the demand is so high. And there's enough people now, especially now with a global market and a bunch of people paying attention to the kind of stuff that is being put out. Why wouldn't you do this? Why are so many importer exporter types so stuck in this totally uncreative, exploitative bastardization of the natural world that we don't have to participate in?
Because it's easy. That it's easy. Yeah. It's not the right answer, but they're just doing it because they've been doing it. They know how to do it. And frankly, they probably don't care. They don't care like we all do, and they're like, I'm going to make money and I don't care. And it's not the right, again, it's not the right answer, but yeah, I like the goal, again, I'm in a very narrow sliver of all this, but the goal, the way I think about it is that enough people get interested in this stuff, right?
Yeah.
They start to, they get some captive breds. They meet some other folks who have captive, you swap the gene pools a little bit. People start to breed them, to your point. Maybe it's me one day, maybe it's some, 5 other people. And then at a certain point, you have a lot more diversity of captive bred animals available for sale to people. I care less about, like, if I was like, I'll just give you an idea. Like, if I was to drop out of the finance world, which would be great eventually, I wouldn't necessarily care so much about making money on the breeding. I would rather sell people the enclosure that the animal is going to be successful in.
Sure.
That to me is of like more of my interest. I think, like, again, I always worry about the breeding part because, like, I'm not that experienced with breeding, amphibians. I know it's happened before, under my care, certain species, but it's like, to me, it would be there's a lot of these salamanders need aquatic setups. Then you've got to get them, move them on. And I talked to the guys, some of the people I bought these from, and they're like, it's a lot of mouths to feed. It's like, they lay like 300 eggs. Some of, like maybe half of them live, but that's 150 salamanders. I've got like 40 right now. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's like, but yeah, I would love to see that across all herps. I think that would be great. I mean, your idea is great. I mean,
actually a good idea. I'm not gonna lie.
No, it is a good idea because you're giving, look, it's an incentive, at least for a half a decade, right? To have this kind of profit share where they're like, all right, I'm going to get money. I don't need to do this. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate. It's kind of disgusting. And it happens with amphibians also, all the time. I mean, I see it. I mean, like, I went to I don't normally go to like the reptile shows. I actually hadn't been to one in so long. I went to a Repticon. It was actually pretty, there was hardly any amphibians to be honest. I mean, there was no salamanders whatsoever. There wasn't even an axolotl. There were some dart frogs and some other like Pac-Man frogs and things like that. But it was really interesting to see the amount of people that showed up with the snakes. Like the shoeboxes filled with like thousands of. I mean,
Oh yeah, sure.
It was. I've never seen it. I mean, I had never really gone to these things, and and I was like, this is insane. Like how many snakes are here, and just in like an enclosure like this, And again, I get it. You're just taking them there to sell, but it was wild. And I don't know what your guys' view on the circuit is of that stuff, but
it's a rough. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
It's a rough view. We try to. Yeah. We tend to we try our best to toe the line when we do this show. We try to maintain like a relative neutrality, right? We tend to, if we're gonna say, we've got this side of like, the herpetoculture industry, which is like rack centric, morph centric, and then on this side we have like hyper naturalistic zoological style setups. I think we tend to fall like to the right of this. Like if this is, we're just a little like an inch closer towards that more naturalistic, zoological, ethical style keeping.
Yeah.
We tend to stay open-minded, but we fall on that side of things, Yeah,
I'm definitely on the same area that you would be on, because it was interesting. There were some people trying to sell naturalistic enclosures. Some of them were okay, but I was just thinking like, this is what the hobby is missing. Like people go out and they spend, and part of it is you want to like a lot of people want to set up. It's a fun process for them to create their own habitat, and I'm all for that. Like that's the best thing. But there's also a lot of people who either don't have the time or are lazy, and I'm like, what the market is missing. I mean, people go out and they spend, I don't know, a lot of money on like an Exoterra or a Zoom Ed paludarium style, and I'm thinking like, there's something missing from that right now. You know what I mean? People are spending a lot of money just for glass or thin glass at that. It's not acrylic. It's not,
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, there's something there. And that's like where I'm like thinking like, maybe my future is creating amazing enclosures, but maybe creating templates of paludarium, stream, waterfall, drip wall, whatever, because you cannot go out and do that. I mean, you know how much work it takes to make one that actually works and doesn't get caught up with cyanobacteria and all this. I mean, it's a trial and error. I mean, like that's all I do. I mean, my wife's like, "What's that smell in the basement?" I'm like, "It's blue green out." I'm like, "Just don't even worry about it." I'm like, just
move along.
Go use the treadmill.
Get out of here.
You don't need to. Go to the little workout room. Don't worry about my little salamander room over here.
I love the idea of a template. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
But it's to me like I went more for observation. I didn't buy it. I bought some driftwood or something. I didn't like. I walked around because I had not been to one of those since I could drive. You know what I'm saying? And so I walked around for about 2 hours and just really took it in. And it was just really amazing. I mean, how many people go to those things though? And again, like, I guess it's good in a way that it gets people interested, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know where these animals come from at all. I mean, I didn't ask anybody. I didn't, nobody was, yelling with a bullhorn, "Hey, these are all captive bred." And maybe most of them are, I don't know. I just, like I said, most of them were reptiles. Yeah. I mean, you would know better than me.
They're not. They're just not, dude. Yeah. Sorry. I hate to be that guy, but they're not. Like,
well, it depends on what it is. I mean, there's some stuff where like you'll go and it can be a majority captive bred. Because I mean, honestly, if you go to most reptile shows, the majority of it's going to be captive bred because the majority is going to be ball pythons and crested geckos.
There was a lot of
and like, but yeah, definitely on tables where you see like lots of diverse species, chances are it's going to be mostly importers, and selling wild caught stuff.
So these companies that are doing this, because with amphibians, it's like, I think in my opinion, it's way harder. Like, I mean, I can't, like I said, I can't even take a salamander to a vet. Like,
I think, I think the biggest reason that it is more reptiles on average is related to their ability to withstand the stress of shipment.
Mm-hmm. Right?
I think that's the primary thing. And that's why you see so many animals from specific regions of the world in which they tend to be more desert. They tend to be a little bit tougher. They tend to be really resilient. And the more difficult an animal gets in its general care and maintenance, the harder it is to get it across. Like it's challenging to get an animal that requires high humidity, good ventilation, and any other list of things in a shipment in sufficient numbers across the border to make your dollar worth it. Right. Whereas with something like, let's say, Uromastyx or red-headed agamas or ball pythons, you can go take weeks and weeks to collect 5,000 of them. And the animals that you caught on day one are going to be alive by day 60. And then you can put all of those in a box, send them across the pond. And then you've got, you can charge it. It's now worth it for you as the importer exporter to bring them in because you've paid a sufficiently low price for a sufficiently high markup, and you have the numbers, and they're going to survive long enough to get to homes. You know what I mean? Like that has to be the primary reason. Yeah, sure. Like regulation, disease, et cetera, all that's there. But like, there's a reason you see mostly desert animals, or like, at least in terms of high quantity and high likelihood of importation. It's because they're easier. They're just more resilient. They're just
yeah. You couldn't do that with like if you ship a salamander or whatever, like it's, I'm always, with the breeder is, the guy that one of the people I deal with, who's again very, 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 very good.
Yeah.
I'm always like, we're waiting for the right weather. We're waiting for the right temperature. We're waiting for the right, and I'm still freaked out because a lot of times the stress just, they'll get sick.
Oh yeah. Toxic stress is a real thing.
Yeah. But to your point, I came away from, again, I don't go to these shows, but I went because there was one here in the area recently, and I just wanted to see. I really wanted to go more to observe what kind of enclosures were for sale. Like it was just more of a kind of like, can you actually buy something that I make somewhere? And the answer is no, you can't. But I did kind of, I don't want to say I had a bad taste, but I was a little shocked that there was that many reptiles just.
Totally.
I felt I didn't feel good when I left. Just put it that way. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just saying I was surprised. I'm ignorant to this. I don't go to these shows, So for me, it was like, what the hell is going on? Like this is crazy.
Listen, Mike, you could call out people on the show. We've had people do it before, and that's
it's interesting to hear. Obviously you're committed, you're a dedicated keeper, and but you're obviously, it's like you're very focused on like just your lane, and so going out to shows, like I feel very similarly. Like I've gone to a few shows, and like I went to my first really big show in January. It was the Reptile Super Show at Pomona. It's the biggest show in the world, I think. It's nuts. And I barely even got to walk around, but I definitely have very complicated feelings about reptile shows.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a lot. It's definitely, a stressful environment on the animals. And also like one thing that I was feeling a lot is like, it's not really my ideal circumstance for selling an animal either, because ideally, you don't want people to feel pressurized, to like, okay, I got to make up my decision about whether or not I'm going to buy this animal by the end of this show,
Right.
And you don't necessarily want to encourage that kind of impulse buying especially to, folks who are less experienced. And obviously a lot of that falls on the seller and whether or not they're doing their work, vetting people and all that stuff. But, I guess all that's just to say, like, I'm with you and having complex feelings about a show, it's a weird thing.
Yeah. And I'm not, like I said, people make a living that, that's I get it, but
for sure.
like for me, like if I went there and I saw 50 deli dishes with salamanders, I'd be, and they're like, oh, these are all captive bred. I'd be like, I know that's not true because I am as deep as you can get into this, and I know, and just I know what's available and what's not, and what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, and it's now, but like I said, I mean, for me, it was more of just to kind of like, are there vendors that go to these shows that sell zoologically appropriate enclosures, and there was a couple. But they were like one-off stuff from someone who was selling 80 snakes. It wasn't someone who just went to say, hey, look, if you want to own a salamander or these types of frogs or toads, this is the best thing you're going to get, period. It's pre-drilled. It's got everything that you're going to need. You just need to add it, wait a couple months, let it cycle, and then slowly introduce your animal, because that's like really the right way to do that stuff. But yeah, to your point on like impulse buying, like I couldn't even imagine like if there was like salamanders there and someone's like, I'm going to buy a salamander today. I'm going to buy some Eco Earth. I'm going to buy this. And this thing's dead. I mean, it's not going to work. Yeah. You can't do that. You have to set it up. You have to wait. You have to. I built, I don't normally do this, but I had a guy reach out to me, really nice guy. He wanted an enclosure he had red Fs that are turning into, the adults for Eastern newts. And I built him an enclosure. I'm like, you got to wait like at least 60 days, plant it, let it go, just let everything get kind of, and then slowly introduce the substrate. And, he's done a great job. I mean, I don't normally do that because I just don't have the time, but it turned out well. But, it's a process. You can't just, add it in immediately. I mean, that's just dangerous. You know what I mean? Like these animals are super sensitive to bacteria and all the other stuff. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd love to live in a world in which we go to a show and I don't have to have that feeling anymore. Right. Yeah. I'd love to go to a show where it's like, oh, I see there's like 10 people here with Uromastyx, but it's like 10 people who have 10 animals. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, they only have 10 and they're like, I hatched these this year. Here are the parents. Here's the setup. I keep I don't have the parents with me because it would be too stressful for them. Here's the 6 foot by 4 foot by 2 foot cage that I keep each individual adult in at home. Like that would be an ideal world for me,
Right, it's different. That's right. That's not what you see though.
There's a guy, there's a friend of mine named Dean in Oregon. This dude baffles me with the level he goes to care for his Uromastyx, most of which he's gotten from me.
Yeah.
It's
amazing. Yeah.
Nuts. They're nuts.
Well, he's an artist. Like,
he's an
literally
artist.
That's what he does, and you see it in his setups. It's incredible. It's super inspiring.
It's the right way to do it. I mean, that's the right way to do this. I mean, and that's kind of, I mean, I have so much respect for that because, I mean, it's frankly what I do too now. I mean, I just like, I've got a 75 gallon with one salamander in it.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's like something you would see in a zoo. I mean, like it's like a professional enclosure and I spend time. I mean, but that's what the animal deserves, right? Like that's what it deserves. I mean, and people like my wife's like, oh, you could probably put more. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I don't think it would be right if I put more in here because, they're territorial and this is going to happen or that's going to happen. And and so it's just, it's an ethical thing, but it's also, sometimes it's a right and wrong, right? And
I agree. So, okay. So, I have one thing I want to say about like a relatively recent current event in herpetoculture. And then I think we're creeping up on like the hour 45. And so maybe after I mention this, maybe we can kind of head that direction towards the close. Yeah. So that's okay. Because this is, by the way, this has been a great episode. I've had a lot of fun talking with you, Mike, and I love
for sure.
Would love to have it. I had multiple people who I mentioned to today that we were going to speak with you on the show tonight, and they were like, "Dude, I'm so stoked! I love what that guy's doing." So it would be great to have you on again if you're up for it. But
yeah, anytime. I appreciate it. Likewise.
Great. Thanks, there was like this recent thing with some relatively famous YouTuber who had like a beautiful setup that was a 4x2 setup, and he had 6 leopard geckos in it. And people like shit their pants over this, right? Like there were people who lost, like people decided not to sponsor. Like I know this dude lost a sponsor because he put 6 leopard geckos in this enclosure. Now, to be clear, this was a 4x2x2 and a beautiful setup for the record. Like it was a gorgeous setup.
Right.
Is a 4x2 too crowded for 6 leopard geckos? Yeah, maybe. Is that nothing compared to what I've seen? Like well established. I've seen, I've seen people who are some of the biggest leopard gecko breeders on Earth share images of them putting like 6 or more females in with a single male in a sweater box.
Yeah.
They don't lose sponsors. They don't like people don't like attack them online.
Yeah.
Like, come on, man. Like, get out of here. Like, just because you wouldn't do it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. And I don't know much about leopard geckos, but I mean, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is how ignorant I am with reptiles. I mean, I should know more, but, I don't know. I mean, if like you would know, right? Like if the enclosure was appropriate and the animals were on top of each other and there was enough space for each, I mean, the way I look at it is like, I can tell when it's a crowded tank, right? And I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I know people that in the past, they're like, oh yeah, I keep 10 salamanders in this tub. And I'm like, that's insane. For sure. I'm like, what are you doing? Sure. But they're like, oh, but they're fine. I'm like, I mean, okay, maybe they're fine, but they're not living their best life. I can tell you that. You know what I'm saying? And again, I'm not like, I'm not telling people what to do. It's just like, for me, I'm just going to, if I have the space and I have the resources, I'm going to do it, But yeah, losing a sponsor or something like that, like I don't know, this who it was, or, again, I'm pretty ignorant to a lot of this stuff outside of like I put my video up and then I'm like changing a diaper for my son. You know what I'm saying? And then I'm it's like,
and I don't know who the particular YouTube. I think it was like someone who's like a relative influencer in her. Sure. I'm not super plugged into this either, but I just remember kind of catching wind of it and seeing little bits of stuff from people about it. And like I say this as someone who I pretty much keep almost all my reptiles solo. You know what I mean? Like almost all of them are housed alone. And, we have some exceptions here and there, but like most of the stuff I keep is kept solo in very large enclosures. That being said, I'm not insane enough to think that that's the only way to do it,
Right. Yeah.
And I'm with you that like there's probably like a wide range at which you can reasonably and ethically keep certain stuff. Yeah. And there's probably going to be gray areas at both ends of that spectrum where it's like, really? And on this side, it's like, really? But like, given the state of most leopard gecko enclosure setups, that guy was doing pretty goddamn good. I saw a setup, like it was a nice looking setup. So no.
Do you think it was like, so do you think it just started just kind of with like earlier to our conversation, just like random comments from people that were just salty, and it just built and built and built, and it kind of got blown out of proportion?
Man, I don't know. It's possible. I mean, I think
that part of the reason why the sponsor dropped, from what I could tell, and I honestly have not like looked into this in any depth. I haven't even seen the enclosure, but I think that part of the reason why they dropped was because they don't want just everybody. I think the sponsor was an enclosure manufacturer, and they don't want everybody just thinking that they can buy these enclosures and put 6 leopard geckos in it, because like, without having requisite knowledge of like how to do that appropriately. And they don't want to be like endorsing someone who's encouraging people to put 6 animals in one setup if they don't know exactly what they're doing. Because and I think that's the whole thing with like the whole influencer thing, is that like I don't know how like I said, I'm not speaking to this person personally because I don't know anything about this person really at all. But
no, I get it.
Like how often is it about like, giving a nuanced take and like really educating the potential viewers about the setup and how to do it appropriately, and like when it's acceptable to cohab versus when it's not, all that kind of stuff, right? It's like pretty rare that that's how it all goes.
Yeah, no. And I'm with you. And for the record, I just put a buddy of mine was sending me this, and I just put it in the chat just so you know. And the only reason I did that is not because, again, I don't care about this individual topic. Like this is not this particular YouTuber, and then like the guy, it's the dude who owns Morph Market was the one who dropped him as a sponsor, and he's making cages. And it was one of those cages. I don't care. I don't care one way or the other. Like, the guy who dropped him as a sponsor is free to do what he wants to do. The guy who put up that this is his leopard gecko enclosure, he's free to do what he wants to do. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that setup is a lot nicer than you'd see for any leopard gecko almost anywhere in the country, right? Like, I'm just saying, right? Like, I'm just suggesting that, like, someone who is a YouTuber and an influencer and someone who's just like, they're not breeding leopard geckos, they might be able to put something up like that. They might be able to say, hey, this is the way I keep my leopard geckos, without it being, this is the way everyone should keep leopard geckos.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm with you. Yeah.
Just one of those things that it's like, it's weird that we don't have a world in which this can be viewed as whatever it is, as opposed to whatever it might mean for everyone paying attention. I feel like that's it's weird that we live in that world. And again, I apologize. I'm not necessarily trying to bring all of us into this current event thing. That's not, it just feel like it just felt like it came up in some way.
We all have to weigh in, you know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We got to put our opinion out here.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I'm looking at it now. I mean, it looks nice. I mean, you know,
it's like a nice image, right? It's like a nice enclosure. Like, it's not great. It's not perfect, for sure.
There's always, you know, like, there's always ulterior motives, right? Like, you know, again, the cages, sales, maybe they're, you know, who knows? I don't, you know, it's like, it's hard to say, but I mean, but I'm with you. Like, I don't think, like, I keep multiple, like, you know, if I have one of these big Exoterra paludariums that I drilled holes in.
Yeah.
I've got my long-tailed salamanders living there. There's 4 of them, you know, and they live in there, and it's huge. It's probably even bigger than they need it. But if I had one, if they all die out and I'd have one, it's going to be that enclosure for that 6-inch salamander, you know, and that's it. You know, that's what I have with my newt right now. My newt's just got his own tank. Unfortunately, I lost one recently, and so I only have one more Eastern newt. Nobody breeds Eastern newts, so I'll be done with Eastern newts after that. You know, it's like, you know, I mean, hopefully I'll find a cool captive bred newt or something like that. But, you know, or I'll just tear the tank down and just clean it out and wait for something, you know, and just use it as a breeding tank maybe eventually. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I mean, I'm all like, look, I'm all for the more space, the better. I just think the animal's going to act more natural, even if it's a pain to find them for food, and they don't hear me coming in and opening the lid. So it's definitely, you know, like that to me is, you know, people are like, I get messages like, I can't believe that you have one salamander in there, and they're like, how much did you spend on the filter and all this stuff? And I'm like, $1,500. And they're like, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, but you know, it's the hobby. I mean, it makes me feel good. I like it. The animal seems pretty damn happy, you know, like,
yeah. I mean, I love to hear that, man. It's like, people always make this comparison in herpetoculture between, like, you know, like saltwater reef aquarium, you know, hobby, where it's like people are spending, you know, 10 grand on the setup, and then $500 on the animals in it, you know, and how it's always the opposite in herpetoculture. People are going to spend 10 grand on an animal, and then they'll put it in like $100 enclosure or something like that, you know, or they'll put it in a rack, you know, and it's, I personally am stoked to see, you know, folks like yourself who are more focused on like the whole environment that the animal is going to be in, you know, and that's, I relate to that. I try to do that as much as I can here as well.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's like my thing. Yeah.
Well,
cool.
Well, listen, so I'm glad we got to take that little derail into the current event.
No, all good.
So we're closing in on 2 hours, and I want to be respectful of your time because they're on the East Coast. So I feel like maybe we should hit towards, you know, our closer. Roy, would you doing that one?
Yeah, no problem, man. So Mike, our closer for every episode is the question, why herpetoculture? And that could be, why do you do it? Why do we do it? Why does it matter in human culture? Just for you, why herpetoculture?
Again, my narrow sliver right now, and again, not that that's not going to expand. I think for me, it was a fascination because of my, that's what sparked this. That's the foundation, like kind of what we talked about at the beginning with my father and my cousin, who's the entomologist and everything, and just. But I think why I got back into it and why I want to do what I'm doing now is more of a. Even though I'm keeping these animals, I think it's more. I think at a granular level, in just kind of ingrained in me is. I find that when I go out and I'll hiking with my wife and we take our son and I'm trying to find. It's a lot harder to find these animals anymore, and I think a lot of that is because of what we're doing to the environment. I think that again, the overdevelopment, the pollution, these animals, I mean, it's an indicator species, right? Like they're highly sensitive to the environment. And if the water quality or there's something's they're either dying off or they're moving, and I find a lot less of these animals than I ever have in the past. Even when I went down to the Blue Ridge Mountains I went down to Western North Carolina, which is like salamander Mecca, they're just, it's out the Smoky Mountains in that area. It's just, in Western North Carolina, it's insane. There's so many salamanders in Eastern Tennessee. It's nuts. I found a lot of things, but not as much as I found in the past. And something's going on, and to me, it's like, I'm keeping them and stuff, but I'm also like, I want there to be awareness that this is happening. I don't have a video on that or anything because I don't even honestly know what I would say because I don't know what my theory. I mean, could be a lot of things, but I want just people to know that they exist. I want people to know that they're there. Yeah. I mean, you ask most people. I mean, if you like, it'd be funny if I should do a video where I go up to random people in like DC one day and be like, tell me what's a salamander? I don't think a lot of people even know what. I mean, I know it's stupid, but awareness, I guess, like awareness that they're there, that they're important animals. I mean, that they're a barometer for our environment. And the fact that we're seeing less, that's telling, right? That means something. Again, I'm not a scientist, I don't know exactly, but I have theories. But I think that's why I do it. I think I think they're unique animals. I think they're extremely important to the environment. I think again that they tell us what's happening in the environment, whether it's good or bad. And I think that's something that I'm going to continue to do. And not in frogs and toads too, right? But salamanders is kind of how I came up, and where I know a little bit. I can be dangerous with that. I know a little bit more there, but and so I think that's why it's something that I continue to do into. Again, like I have a busy life. We're constantly traveling. We're doing stuff. I'm working, but to me, I carve out a certain amount of time every week to focus on this, to try to think of new content, to try to answer people. Again, to your point, I'd like to write more. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to write anything that's scientifically significant, but more observational. And so I think that it's important. And I just, I know it sounds dumb. It's like, I think it's if we reach one person, then, but it's true. I mean, if you're providing good information and more people come away aware that these animals exist, that they are important, that they are in your environment. And if you're not seeing them, there's a reason why. That's concerning. So anyways, I think, I kind of rambled a little bit. But I think if you put all that together, that's in totality. I think it's just awareness for the animals. And raising awareness for them, because let's be honest, how often do you hear people talking about this, right? Like they're not popular pets. No. They're not. I think I don't know, was it Pokemon or maybe not Pokemon?
Hell yeah.
Was it the axolotl or something? Something made something popular at some point. I don't know. But outside of that, like nobody knows about these animals. Nobody talks about them. Only the people that know about them are people like us and people who are in this hobby, which is not that big. So
it's true.
So I know I build enclosures and stuff, but I think part of it is also like hey, this is XYZ salamander. People are like, oh, it's so cool. They're so cool. Like, I didn't even know they existed. It might be one person or it might be 15 people that say it. It's just, it's more of an awareness thing, I think. And eventually I'd like to devote more time to it. I just, right now it's tough, but
dude.
Well, you're still doing a lot and contributing a lot, despite the lack of time. So we'll all just have to get out of the way when you do have time.
You're like, remember that clown we had on our show? He's got like a salamander museum or something.
Oh, it's great. I would love that.
Oh no, dude, then we'll be there.
Yeah, we'll go.
So, but yeah, like I said, I'm going to do as much as I can and hopefully get into some new species. And I would love to see more captive bred guide. I mean, that would be the biggest thing, not just for people in the hobby, but maybe for repopulation efforts and stuff. I know the Amphibian Foundation does a lot of things for the flatwood salamander. And they do a lot of great work. And so places like that, I hope they continue to get good funding. And, I just think it's really important. So,
couldn't agree more, dude.
Agreed, man.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for the time. And, great conversation. I learned more about reptiles. I mean, I love reptiles too. Like I said, I just don't spend enough time looking. I'm just knee deep in salamander stuff usually. So it's tough.
For us, it's just the inverse relationship. So we appreciate getting to talk to a salamander guy. It's cool.
So I see all the cage. I mean, so what are you keeping behind you? I mean, you're obviously in a.
For me, in this room, I've got a whole bunch of different tropical snakes, mostly a species called the Amazon puffing snake. So all the stuff over here, those are all babies. So I raise my babies in these setups before they find new homes.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
Over on this side of the room, I've got a handful of different lizards from temperate regions. I've got some Texas alligator lizards and
that's awesome.
So a whole bunch of different random stuff, but yeah, man.
I thought you were gonna tell me it was like a new Zoom fake background. You're like,
oh yeah.
Hey, there's a business idea. Not
a bad idea.
I really appreciate it, guys. It's a great conversation. Definitely kindred spirit with, I think your the way that you approach it and the why you're doing it too. I think it's good to know there's a lot of people out there that and you're raising awareness too from your platform here on the right way, the humane, appropriate way to keep animals like this. It's really it's more in focus now than ever, and you have things like podcasts and YouTube channels and Instagram pages where you can get the message out in a much more cost effective manner than ever in the past. I mean, I think that's why the hobby was kind of so bare bones in the past, because the information wasn't out there. It was in books in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, people weren't, we didn't have all this. So I think it's really great what you're doing. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for that, man.
Yeah.
That's really gratifying. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time. This is super fun. And we're really looking forward to chatting with you again. And
anytime.
Hey, thanks for doing what you're doing and keep it up, man. We really want to see what's next.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
For sure.
Awesome. I'm going to hit the button, guys.
Yeah, hit that button.
Yeah.